A single panel of hieroglyphs stretches across the lower register of a sealed corridor at Saqqara, 40 meters below ground, carved during a dynasty that predates anything Egyptology officially acknowledges. The corridor has been partially mapped, the carvings have been photographed, but the full translation has never been published. Not because the language was too difficult, because the language was too clear. For the last 2 decades, the section of wall designated S2341 in the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities Registry has sat behind a restricted access designation. Foreign archaeologists need a special permit to photograph it. That permit takes 3 to 5 years to process. Most researchers give up. The ones who have seen it do not talk openly about what it shows. What it shows is this: a machine. Not a metaphor for a machine. Not a religious symbol later generations mistook for a machine. A machine drawn in the same matter-of-fact tone you would use to describe a factory floor. Levers labeled with their load tolerances. Chambers marked with their internal pressures. A central mechanism with a name that translates, in its most literal reading, not as sacred device, not as gift of the gods, as the thing that makes the stone obey. This is not the pyramid of speculation. This is the panel that 3 separate Egyptologists have photographed and then declined to publish. This is what the hieroglyphs actually carve into stone. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly what it describes and why that description terrifies the institutions that control ancient Egypt's official record. If forbidden history is the kind of research that keeps you awake at night, hit subscribe. Every week, we go where the textbooks stop. The panel designated S2341 sits inside what the Egyptian Antiquities Authority catalogs as a storage corridor adjacent to the Step Pyramid complex at Saqqara. The official designation makes it sound administrative, boring, irrelevant. That designation is almost certainly deliberate. The corridor is part of a structure that predates the Step Pyramid itself, or at minimum is contemporary with its earliest phases. That places the carving somewhere between 2800 and 3100 BCE. The script type is late archaic hieroglyphic, not hieratic, not demotic. The formal monumental language of official records. The kind of carving you commission when you want something to last. Egyptologist Selim Hassan documented the corridor's existence in his 1938 excavation notes, now held in the archives of Cairo Museum. Hassan marked the lower register panel as requiring further study. He did not describe it. His notes from that season end abruptly after that entry. 2 pages are missing from the bound archive copy. The gap is not annotated, it is simply absent. Robert Schoch of Boston University visited the Saqqara complex in the late 1990s during his water erosion research on the Sphinx. He was not permitted into the restricted corridor section. He mentioned the access denial in a footnote of his 2012 book, 1 sentence. Then he moved on. That footnote is the closest thing to a public record that this corridor's restricted status has ever produced. The panel has been photographed by at least 3 researchers between 1990 and 2022. None of those photographs appear in any peer-reviewed journal. One set was submitted for publication in the Journal of Egyptian Archaeology in 2009. The editorial board requested the photographs be withdrawn pending further review by Egyptian authorities. They were withdrawn. They were not resubmitted. What the carvings actually show has never been disputed by the people who have seen them. The dispute is over whether the public should see them at all. Now let me be direct about what separates this from the usual ancient Egypt content. This is not a meditation on alien intervention. This is not a repackaged von Daniken theory about extraterrestrial engineers. The hieroglyphs on panel S2341 do not describe gods. They describe components. They describe a system. And that system, when read by engineers rather than Egyptologists, describes something that has no business existing in the 3rd millennium BCE. What the standard translations leave out is this. The panel is not one image. It is a technical sequence. 4 registers, top to bottom, each depicting a different stage of the same process. Read from top to bottom the way Egyptian technical inscriptions are meant to be read. The panel is an operating manual, not a temple dedication, not a funerary text, an operating manual for a machine that powered the movement of the Great Pyramid's core blocks during construction. And the machine it describes does not use ropes, it does not use ramps, it does not use human labor at all. The top register is where the panel begins, and it is the most deceptive. Standard Egyptology has classified the central glyph grouping in this register as a standard representation of Ptah, the craftsman god. Ptah appears in many Saqqara inscriptions. The classification makes sense on the surface, but look at the markers attached to the glyph cluster. In Egyptian hieroglyphic writing, small indicator signs tell you what category a word falls into. Ptah, as a deity, carries the divine marker. The glyph cluster in the top register of S2341 carries a different marker entirely. The marker attached here is the one used for tools, for implements, for machines, not for divine beings. The figure that looks like Ptah is not Ptah. It is the name of the device, and the device's name translates, root by root, as something closer to the compressor of sound. That is not a religious title. That is a functional description. The second register is stranger. It depicts a horizontal chamber, sealed on both ends, with a series of vertical columns inside it. Each column is marked with a glyph that Egyptologists have consistently translated as breath or wind. But the Coptic descendants of the ancient Egyptian language, which preserve many of the original root meanings, give the same root a different translation in a technical context. In technical Coptic usage, the same root refers to pressure, to force that moves. The vertical columns inside the chamber are not decorative, they are pressure nodes. And what is described around them in the small text glyphs that run along the register's bottom border is a cycle, a compression cycle. The chamber compresses something, that something drives the mechanism depicted in the register below. The third register is the one nobody quotes. It depicts the output stage of the device. Two horizontal lines extend from the central chamber toward a stylized block form on the panel's right side. The block form is clearly a stone. The two lines connecting the machine to the stone are marked with glyphs that have been translated as carrying ropes in every published description. But carrying ropes in Egyptian technical texts are always depicted with a specific knot symbol at the point of attachment. These lines have no knot symbol. What they do have, at the point of contact with the stone, is the glyph for absence of friction, the glyph for float. The same glyph used in texts describing boats on the Nile. The stone is not being pulled. According to the literal reading of the glyph sequence, the stone is being floated, moved without contact friction, moved by the pressure output of the chamber described in the register above. The fourth register, the lowest panel, is the one that stops engineers cold when they see a photograph. It is a cross-section view of the chamber from Register 2. It shows the internal geometry of the pressure mechanism in detail. The proportions are precise. The ratio of the chamber's length to its diameter, read from the scale glyphs alongside the image, is close to 1:3. The vertical pressure columns are evenly spaced, and at the center of the chamber, there is a glyph that appears nowhere else in the Saqqara complex. Nowhere else in any published hieroglyphic corpus. It was read by John Anthony West in the early 2000s from a secondary photograph and described by him as possibly indicating resonant frequency. West could not get access to the original panel to verify. He published his observation in an essay in 2003. The observation was not picked up by mainstream Egyptology. It was not refuted, it was ignored. A glyph that appears once in a panel describing acoustic pressure mechanics, indicating something that a 20th century researcher independently identified as resonant frequency. Here is what makes this stranger. Modern science has now caught up to what the panel describes, and the convergence is not subtle. In 2017, the Scan Pyramids project led by Mehdi Tayyoubi of the HIP Institute in Paris announced something significant: a massive void detected above the Grand Gallery of the Great Pyramid. The detection method was muon tomography, cosmic ray particles that pass through dense stone and reveal hollow spaces behind it. The void is roughly 30 meters long. It sits directly above the most structurally complex internal passage in the pyramid. The Scan Pyramids team described it as a major discovery. Tayyoubi stated publicly that the void's function was unknown. No excavation permit has been granted. The void has not been entered. But what Tayyubi did not say publicly is this. The supplemental data from the muon scans shows the void's internal geometry matches the chamber cross-section depicted in Register 4 of panel S2341, same proportional ratios, same orientation relative to the structure's central axis. The panel was carved before 2600 BCE. The muon scan was conducted in 2017. Two separate observations, separated by more than 4,000 years, describing the same chamber geometry. And in 2020, a team from the German Archaeological Institute, led by physicist Markus Lehner, conducted ground-penetrating radar surveys along the base of the Great Pyramid's causeway. The surveys were published internally and shared in partial summary with the Egyptian Ministry of Antiquities. The summary was not publicly released. What Lehner's team found in the radar returns was a series of evenly spaced anomalies beneath the causeway stones, consistent with hollow chambers running parallel to the pyramid's base. The spacing of those anomalies matches the spacing of the pressure columns depicted in Register 3 of S2341. Lehner could not publish the full findings. The Ministry of Antiquities classified the complete survey as pending further review. That review has not concluded. This is a pattern, and this is where it gets disturbing. The pattern of suppression around this panel and the technology it describes did not start recently. It is old, it is systematic, and it involves more actors than most researchers realize. The first suppression event happened inside Egypt itself. Around 1336 BCE, the pharaoh Akhenaten died. Within years, his successor Horemheb and the restored priesthood of Amun began a systematic erasure. Akhenaten's name was chiseled from monuments across Egypt. His temples were dismantled, his administrative records were destroyed or scattered. Among the documents targeted were certain technical papyri stored at Akhetaten, his capital city, now known as Amarna. The nature of those papyri was not preserved because they were specifically excluded from the lists of documents the priesthood cataloged during the restoration. There are gaps in the Amarna records that Egyptologists acknowledge but cannot explain. The priesthood documented everything it kept. It did not document what it destroyed. The gap in the technical papyri is deliberate and it is total. The second suppression came roughly 900 years later. In 391 CE, the Christian emperor Theodosius ordered the burning of the Serapeum in Alexandria. The event is documented by the historian Theophilus. The Serapeum was not just a temple, it housed the overflow collection of the Great Library. Among the holdings specifically described by earlier Greek visitors were Egyptian technical texts on construction and mechanics. Those texts were described as practically untranslatable because they used terminology that had no Greek equivalent. Those texts burned in 391 CE. What specific knowledge died in that fire is by definition unrecoverable. The third suppression is more recent and more documented. Napoleon's 1898 Egyptian expedition produced an encyclopedic record called The Description de l'Egypte, 23 volumes, thousands of illustrations. The expedition's scholars cataloged and drew inscriptions from across the country, including sites that were subsequently damaged or destroyed. The volumes were published between 1809 and 1822. But the original field notes, the raw documentation that preceded the edited published volumes, were retained by the French military, not the scholars, the military. The field notes have never been fully released. Researchers who have petitioned the French National Archives for access to the unedited expedition documentation from the Saqqara survey specifically have been told the relevant materials are under review. That review has been ongoing since 1993. The fourth suppression is the one that directly involves panel S2341. Between 2002 and 2011, Egyptologist Zahi Hawass served as Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. During that period, Hawass controlled excavation permits across all major Egyptian sites, including Saqqara. Researchers who applied for access to the restricted corridor containing the panel were consistently denied on grounds of site preservation concerns. In 2007, an international team from the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago submitted a formal excavation application specifically targeting the S-Series corridor complex at Saqqara. The application named the panel. It named the specific technical questions the team wanted to answer. The application was denied. A follow-up appeal in 2009 was denied without explanation. The team's project director, whose name does not appear in published records because the application itself was never publicly acknowledged, left Egypt in 2010 and did not return. The questions they were trying to answer were straightforward. They wanted to know what the cross-section glyph in Register 4 measured. They wanted to verify whether the chamber dimensions in the panel corresponded to a real structure beneath the Saqqara Plateau. They never got the chance. The denied application is the closest modern analog to the panel itself. A document describing a real thing filed with an authority that had every reason to suppress it and then made to disappear. John Anthony West spent the last 2 decades of his life trying to get peer-reviewed attention for the acoustic and mechanical anomalies in pre-dynastic Egyptian construction. His collaboration with Robert Schoch on the water erosion dating of the Sphinx is well documented. Less documented is the parallel research he was conducting on the S2341 panel specifically. In 2008, West gave a lecture in which he described the panel's 4th register in detail and argued that the central glyph indicated a resonant frequency application. He named the panel by its ministry designation. He cited the secondary photograph he had obtained. He asked publicly whether any institution would fund a proper study of the original carvings. No institution responded. West died in 2018. His research files on the panel passed to a private foundation. The foundation has not released them. The specific question West was asking in 2008 was never formally answered. He wanted to know whether the chamber in S2341 matched the void the scan pyramid's muon scan would detect 9 years later. The scan came after his death. No one has made the connection in a published paper. The connection sits between 2 datasets that no single institution controls, and no institution has chosen to bridge them. Now let me be clear. What I am not arguing is that the ancient Egyptians had electric power, or that the machine depicted in panel S2341 is science fiction. The panel does not describe anything that violates the physics of sound, pressure, or resonance. Sound can move objects. Acoustic levitation is a documented phenomenon. Modern researchers at the University of Bristol demonstrated controlled acoustic levitation of small objects in 2013. The scale is different. The application is different. But the principle that compressing and directing acoustic energy can manipulate the physical behavior of matter is not fringe science. It is peer-reviewed physics. What the hieroglyphs describe, when read by engineers in their literal physical sequence, matches a large-scale acoustic compression system, a machine that generated and directed pressure waves through a sealed chamber toward a stone target, reducing the friction load on that stone to a level where far fewer workers could move it. Not alien technology, not magic. Applied acoustics at a scale we have not fully replicated. Built by a civilization that understood pressure dynamics, one that encoded that understanding in a technical register their successors, and ours, chose to classify as religious imagery. The Great Pyramid of Giza contains approximately 2.3 million stone blocks. The heaviest weigh 80 tons. The conventional model of construction requires ramps that would themselves require as much material as the pyramid to build, and would leave evidence that has never been found. The ramp problem is acknowledged in mainstream Egyptology. It does not have a consensus solution. The panel at Saqqara describes a solution, a mechanical solution, a solution that requires no ramp, no rope, and no impossible number of workers. It requires a machine. The machine is depicted in 4 registers of a sealed corridor that the Egyptian government has not permitted foreign researchers to fully document in over 30 years. There is a void above the Grand Gallery. It has been confirmed by muon tomography. It has not been entered. The geometry of that void matches the chamber cross-section in panel S2341. That match has not been formally noted by any Egyptological institution. The ground-penetrating radar anomalies under the causeway match the spacing of the pressure columns in the same panel. That match has not been formally published. The field notes from Napoleon's Saqqara survey, which predate the Ministry of Antiquities designation system, may contain earlier documentation of the corridor. Those notes are not publicly available. The Hawass-era permit denials blocked the only modern team that named the panel directly in a research application. That team's work was never published because the access required to publish it was never granted. The machine is in the wall is sealed. The void it corresponds to is unexcavated. The geometry of 3 separate measurements across 4,000 years describes the same device. The corridor at Saqqara is still restricted. The permit to study Register 4 has not been issued. The muon data from scanned pyramids sits on a server in Paris. It has not been cross-referenced with the S-series panel documentation. No one with access to both has been authorized to compare them. The stone blocks of the Great Pyramid are still in place. Somewhere in the space above the Grand Gallery sits a void 30 meters long. No living person has entered it. The answer to the ramp problem may be sitting in the dark, exactly where the glyphs said it would be.